We're the largest fractional property investment platform in Indonesia. We allow anyone, so Indonesians as well as foreigners, to invest into high-yielding Indonesian property from as little as $1. Indonesia is a bit more chaotic, unorganized. It definitely has a charm to it, but I would say be on the ground, try and understand the people, try how this culture works. But I think in the future, or it's something we're working on at the moment, is how can we leverage technology to automate more of this process. Upload the historical data and it will spit out a full forecast. Things become quite reasonable and acceptable. So I always say this to people, just give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? You lose a bit of money? Just go for it. But at least you've tried. At least you'll never regret trying. You may regret not doing it.
Hi guys, this is Philip, your co-host of the CTO show by TechVibe. Today we're here in Indonesia, in Jakarta, with an amazing new guest called Robert. Robert is the co-founder and CEO of Goro, which helps you invest in any Bali villa for as little as $1. I think, Robert, you have such an incredible journey because not only you're working in a very new area, and this is quite a new business model, but you obviously are not Indonesian yourself. So I would love to kind of dive a little bit deeper into your journey first and kind of, look into why you're here and what's kind of brought you here in the first place.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, first of all. So I was born and bred in the Netherlands, where I also went to school and did my initial part of my studies. But then I had the opportunity to go to the UK to do my bachelor's. It's also where I started my first company, which I subsequently sold about 5 years later. But having lived in the UK, I had the chance, or my company back then had a factory in Vietnam. So I had a chance to go out to Vietnam a couple of times and stopping over in Singapore. And I was like, this seems like quite a fun part of the world to be in. It seems a lot more exciting than Europe. So after I sold the company, I was like, let's move to Singapore for maybe 6 months. Famous last words. 10 years later, I'm still in this part of the world. So I was living out in Singapore for about 8 years. And then for the last 2 years, I've mainly been here in Jakarta.
That's amazing. And did you start this business in Singapore or?
Where this really started is that it's actually my side hustle that became my full-time job, really.
Wow.
So about 8-9 years ago, I was on a trip with my friends from Singapore. We went to Bali and we're staying in one of these super nice villas. And I was just wondering, how much is it to buy one of these? And then I did a quick check about the price, how much I was paying in rent. And I was like, hey, this seems quite interesting. So I said to my friends, let's buy something together. And they were like, you know nothing about Bali real estate. Why would we give you money? I said, okay, then I'll go myself. So I ended up starting an arbitrage business. So I would rent a property long-term and then sublet it daily and then make my margin in between. And then quite quickly, my friends and family came back and said, hey, you're doing something very interesting. Can we co-invest? Can you advise where we shouldn't be buying properties? And that kind of triggered the idea of, can I do something around fractional investing? And that's basically what Goro is today.
That's amazing. I guess for those people who don't know too much about Goro, do you have like a one-liner or more information you can tell us about it?
I think you did it pretty well at the beginning, but we're the largest fractional property investment platform in Indonesia. We allow anyone, so Indonesians as well as foreigners, to invest into high-yielding Indonesian property from as little as $1.
Wow. And I guess, do you guys target mainly the Indonesian local market or like foreigners like yourself who maybe they want to invest in Bali? Or
when we started the business, we had to make that decision, like, are we targeting Indonesians or are we going after the foreign market? Because your messaging is very different and each have different challenges. Obviously, when you're doing cross-border, you're dealing with FX, you're dealing with licensing in different markets, tax, accounting. So we said, let's focus on the domestic market first. So 98.2% of our users is actually Indonesian.
Oh, wow. And I guess traditionally in Indonesia, is there like a cultural appetite to invest in property?
Yeah, so if we look at the numbers, there's about 165 million Indonesians that have never invested.
Wow.
So we have about 20 million crypto investors. There's about 10 million stock market investors. But it means there's 165 million adults that have never made an investment. But one of these things that when people become middle class, they aspire to invest in property. So that's kind of the market that we're tapping into. We want to help these people to make their first investment and then making it in property. And it's for a couple of reasons, because property is tangible, that appreciates over time, gives you passive income, and it's a relatively easy asset class to understand. Even from a very young age, people are kind of told about how property works.
Yeah.
We don't need to educate them about what is property and how does it work. We just need to educate them about what is our role in the mix. What do we do as a platform?
I see. So speaking of your role as a platform, is it that you guys will fundamentally pool this capital together and then buy it and everyone has a share of ownership, or how does the actual nuances of something like this work?
We work slightly different because we actually acquire the property first. Why do we do this? It means that we are in control.
Wow.
We already own that asset. We can appoint the management and then we tokenize it. So we then allow people to invest in fractions from as little as 10,000 rupiah, or roughly about $1. And that basically buys them beneficial ownership over a portion of that specific property. So they pick the property they wish to invest in. And then in return, they get monthly paid rent yield. They get their share of the capital appreciation when the property is sold in a few years.
Yeah.
And they get voting rights, for example.
Got it. I mean, it sounds quite straightforward, and I do imagine that maybe some other people are just doing this on an individual basis. Maybe they're just pooling capital with their friends and co-investing. I guess for those users out there who are considering you guys, like, what are the benefits of using something like you guys as opposed to, just doing it yourself?
So fractional property investing has been around for, probably from the early days that property was seen as an asset, because technically you and I, we could buy a property together and it's technically fractional investing.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at the developed markets like the US, REITs have been around since the 1960s.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, Indonesia only introduced REITs about 10 years ago. And they had double taxation issues. They had limitations on the assets they could buy. So there's a lot of trouble for that product to gain traction. And that's basically the gap in the market that we see that we can fill by tokenization of property. But one of the key benefits is obviously the low entry barrier.
Yep.
It's basically even your delivery guy can now participate in these assets. We offer 100% liquidity.
Wow.
If you put in $100 today and you want your money out, we simply give you your money back.
Huh.
Now, the way we do this, because I can see you kind of respond to this, is that we have built this amazing community of about 25,000 people on Telegram.
Right.
Whereby when you sell your tokens back to us, back to the company, we simply market that to our Telegram community, which is fully automated. So by the time you sell, within seconds, these tokens are snapped up by other users again. So it's a great feature and it drives a lot of engagement on the platform.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, I feel like often when you invest in property, you have disputes, right? And then people want to sell all this time. And it seems like you guys are really solving that kind of problem, the liquidity issue.
Personally, I don't like to have my money tied into a specific product for such a long period,
right,
for like multiple years, let's say 5 years. So if I personally am not comfortable with that, how can I then confidently sell this to my users? Of course. So that's why we also said from the beginning, let's make sure we can make this liquid. On top of this, if we look at the literacy, the financial literacy in Indonesia, it's still relatively low. So what we have seen is that some users would invest all the money they have.
Wow.
So they put all the money in, which is fantastic that they trust us with their money and they want to be part of this movement that we've built. But the next day they realize that they don't have money to pay for food.
Oh.
So if they're then locked in for 5 years, how are we actually helping that user?
Wow.
So in this case, they can partially liquidate, for example. So they would sell, instead of $100, they reduce to $90 and they can at least buy food or pay for their tuition.
Wow. That's a very interesting and maybe it's a very unique Indonesian kind of usage pattern. Are there any others ones that, you find quite intriguing or quite interesting?
I think the user behavior on the website traffic or the app traffic, you would think that, or when we started, my personal thought process was probably the evening hours are the busiest. So people have left work, they're commuting on the way home, and then probably at night they'll be checking their investments or the portfolio, right? For us, it's the complete opposite. So the lowest time of the day is actually that window, like that post working hours till bedtime is actually the lowest. So 6 till 10, we see the least amount of traffic on the website. Funnily enough, the busiest time of the day is at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And that trend kind of continues till about 1, 2 p.m. And then it steadily declines to the lowest point at 7, 8 p.m.
And why is that? Like, why is that time the most kind of popular time during the day?
I guess that's when people are active, the most active, yeah. It's a very strange pattern and we've had to adjust our customer service to this. Because I remember when we first started, we didn't have much user insights. So we would focus our customer service and sales efforts to the evenings. And we're like, this doesn't really work. Like, what's going on? And then we started to look more into the data, and then we switched patterns.
Interesting. I guess another thing that you mentioned that was quite interesting to me is that when in the West, when we think about property investing, we often think about it as a really big investment, right? And you put a lot of money, it's a one-time transaction, but it seems like it's quite different here.
So for us, to give you some insights, the average first transaction is about 120,000 rupiah, which is about $8.
Wow.
And then you would think that the user would wait about 1 month to get the first rental yield payout to see if they want to do like a feedback loop.
Sure.
But what we generally see is that within 20 days, they make that the second transaction, and then the repeats, the lead time gets shorter after that.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I guess like a lot of this behavior is quite like non-intuitive, right? Especially if you're coming from the West or building this kind of company. Quite interesting. Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, it seems like obviously you're doing property and finance, and traditionally in most countries, these are quite regulated areas. How do you guys navigate that? And is there some kind of regulatory authority that you guys have to work with to make this model work?
So we recently created history by becoming the first company to be supervised by the regulatory body here in Indonesia called OJK.
Okay.
So we've become a participant in their sandbox program.
Wow.
But that only happened at the end of 2024. But we've been operating for about 2.5 years now. So when we initially launched, when me and my co-founder started working on Goro, we spent about 6 months with lawyers and tax advisors to understand, what can we do?
Right.
What can't we do? Is there any regulation we can follow? Any other companies that did something similar? And what we realized is that the model that we wanted to build doesn't exist from a regulatory framework. So technically, or basically, regulators work in kind of boxes. So you have peer-to-peer lending, you have crowdfunding, you have REITs, and none of that kind of fitted to what we were doing.
Right.
In fact, we spoke to the regulators and they said, no, we don't do anything about this. So I guess we were brave enough to just launch and see if the product works. In fact, on hindsight, it was a great benefit because it allowed us to launch, iterate the product, gain traction, and actually we achieved product market fit before even getting into the sandbox. So by the time we were ready to apply it to the sandbox, we already had a very strong, well-performing business.
I see.
Now that process still took about a year or so to get into the sandbox.
Wow.
Very happy to be the first in the country to be recognized for property tokenization.
And did you guys develop this sandbox in conjunction with the government, or how did that actually end up coming about?
So the sandbox was closed temporarily and the leadership changed, and it reopened last year in 2024. We're a bit lucky, I must say. People always talk about this in startups where they say, we got a bit lucky along the way. And I do think we definitely got lucky here. Why? The leadership of the sandbox team, they're very pro tokenization. They see the potential that this can have on Indonesia and globally. So they are very forward thinking and, hey, let's see how we can bring these type of products to the market. And that all happened last year.
Wow. Okay. I'm also curious, obviously, when you deal with regulators, a lot of the times it's tough for anyone, but for you, you're also a foreigner. So how was that experience? Like, how did you navigate that process?
My co-founder is local Indonesian.
Okay.
So that helped. The first person that we gave equity to was a lawyer. He's a capital markets lawyer.
I see.
So that helped. So he's been helping us build the product from the very beginning. Our lawyers love us, Just imagine the amount of invoices they've sent to us over the last year.
I'm sure.
Our application alone was about 500 pages.
Wow.
But it was also one of the reasons, because we had 2 years of data, our application was actually based on real world examples instead of kind of saying, hey, we want to try or experiment something. This was all based on real traction. So which I think helped us during the application process.
Wow. Okay. So I guess for other founders who are maybe working in regulated fields, maybe in finance or fintech, e-wallets, real estate, whatever, like what advice would you have for them? Is it going to be, you should just launch your product and then hopefully a sandbox open up, or, what would you kind of advice that you would give them?
Get a good lawyer.
Okay.
Secondly, you need to understand the regulator's position. If we look at a market like Singapore, which is very heavily regulated and they're also very strict,
Yeah.
You probably want to be a bit more conservative.
Yeah.
In a country in Indonesia where there's not so much regulation, you can probably be a bit more creative, but you still want to cross-check this with a lawyer who kind of navigates, because you need to look at the pros and cons, right? What are the opportunities? Why would I operate as a non-regulated business? And what are the cons? Obviously, when you launch a non-regulated business, you're going to get questioned all day, every day about being a scam.
Got it.
So that was one of the challenges there. But yeah, get a good lawyer, check the regulatory frameworks, read up about the existing documentation that they have around their frameworks to get a true understanding of what the regulation actually means.
I see. I'm curious as well because, for you, it seems like you've worked across the world, right? In obviously Europe, in Singapore, I think you were exploring India for a bit and now in Indonesia. I'm just curious a little bit more about your insights and maybe just compare and contrast the working dynamics of maybe working and building a team or even hiring in Indonesia compared to some of these other places. And I think this is hugely helpful for maybe entrepreneurs who are considering opening a business here or even just opening an office here as well.
It's very different, yeah. The Dutch are obviously known for being very structured and punctual.
Right.
Indonesians are probably more known for being always late and less structured.
Right.
But I think it's also the beauty of doing business here. But I must admit that the first kind of year and a half of doing business here, I had to personally adapt.
Wow.
So, because people just operate slightly different to the way we operate in the Western world. Yeah? So you have to adapt to their culture. One of the great examples I always use is that in the Western world, or at least in Holland, people tend to eat their lunch at their desk. So we come into work, we start working, and as soon as we're done, we get out of the office, right?
Right.
Whereas here, I find that they like to go for an hour-long lunch, hour-long lunch, but then they tend to stay much longer in the office. So like 7 or 8.
Oh, wow.
They talk a lot more with each other. So there's a lot more of a community kind of spirit in the office, which is quite nice to see. But obviously as a founder, when you lose money every month, there's a lot of pressure. And then you see people being quite casual sometimes. That can be quite frustrating, as you can imagine. But that's just part of their culture. That's the way this country operates. So I've started to appreciate this. And at the same time, I'm trying to kind of share how we operate in the Western world. So I hope that we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
I think one great achievement we have is that all our meetings always start on time.
That's amazing. So how did you make that happen?
There's actually quite a funny insight, I would say.
Yeah.
Luckily, my co-founder is also very punctual. So as a co-founder team, always on time. When we started, we were like, how do we make sure that we don't waste time, right? So what we start to do is when people are late, we make them sing a song.
Wow.
Now, you may think that's humiliating, but on the other hand, Indonesians love singing. One of our favorite post-work activities with the team is actually go to karaoke.
Karaoke, yeah.
So what we do is when someone sings, we often see that the whole team joins in.
I see.
But obviously, no one wants to be put on the spot at 10 o'clock in the morning to sing a song. So it is a bit of punishment, but at the same time, it's not like pure humiliation. So it has worked very well. Maybe sometimes people are late on purpose, I guess. So
I see.
A song with the team.
This episode is brought to you by TechVibe, your one-stop IT recruitment solution provider. We connect global companies with top tech talent across Southeast Asia. Whether you're looking for permanent hires, short-term contractors, or employer of record, EOR services, we've got you covered, especially in the IT and digital sectors. Thanks for tuning in. And now, enjoy the episode.
I guess I'm also curious, like for you as a founder, like how else, have you felt like you had to adapt in regards to maybe the cultural attitude here or the working attitude, these kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So like punctuality, people are it is acceptable to be like 15, 20 minutes late to a meeting, where in Europe it was like, it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
I think a great thing we just did yesterday, this month, March, is Ramadan. So the Muslims, they fast during the day.
Yeah.
Obviously, working hours have to be adjusted. But then at night, you tend to go out with your team to break fast and all eat together.
Yeah.
These are actually very nice cultural things that I've got to experience working here.
Okay. Overall, I guess if you are giving advice to other CEOs who maybe they're considering building a team here or maybe outsourcing certain functions to Indo, would you recommend it? Or what would be your kind of advice for them?
I would say be on the ground, yeah. We've seen a lot of founders in this part of the world that were built from Singapore because it's clean, it's safe, it's organized. They like to be there. Indonesia is a bit more chaotic, unorganized. It definitely has a charm to it, but I would say be on the ground, try and understand the people, try how this culture works, try and understand how the people think and operate, and you'll love them. They're absolutely fantastic people. They're very warm people. They're very forgiving people. They're absolutely amazing to work with. So yeah, be on the ground, work with them, and you'll definitely succeed.
That's amazing. I guess for you, you've also lived across all of these different countries. Is there something specific that draws you to Indonesia? Because obviously there's a, Bali investment villa piece, but when you look at the country broader as a whole, right, or the tech ecosystem as a whole, are you quite optimistic about, kind of where the country is headed and where the opportunities are?
For me personally, what really excites me about Indonesia is that we have probably or arguably the number one holiday destination in the world in this country, Bali,
right?
Which attracts tons of, or I think last year we had about 7 million foreign tourists come to Bali. But on the other hand, we have so many other growth opportunities in Jakarta, the capital. We got a place like Bandung, which is a student city. There's another bunch of other large cities where we see a lot of opportunities that most people probably will have never heard of. But it does allow me to kind of experiment with different asset classes in different areas to see where we can get the best yield for our users.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing is that you guys not only do Bali villas, and you guys are now diversifying to other asset classes as well, right?
So we have a number of villas in Bali. And then we have a number of working class apartments in Jakarta. We just launched one a few days ago. It sold out in 19 minutes.
Wow. 19 minutes.
90, yeah.
Oh my God.
My marketing team was a bit disappointed. They spent more time on creating the listing and doing all the marketing. Ready to go in 90 minutes, but it's a great testimony that we have built something that people want. So that's super exciting. But the assets are very different. In Bali, we're talking very nice holiday villas that we rent on a short-term basis. They often have a gym or a pool, obviously a pool, sauna, pool table, cinema. So they're very fancy properties.
Right.
Whereas here in Jakarta, we focus on working class housing. So very kind of entry level, very simple, plain apartments. But a lot of workers that live outside of Jakarta that need to come here for a shorter period of time, they kind of stay with us.
Got it. And do you find that there's different investors who invest in villas versus the working class apartments, or like is there any kind of differentiation that you see?
When you deal with retail investors, you're also dealing with emotions.
Right.
Which makes a huge impact. Maybe as much as half of the decision is actually based on emotions. Why? When you're investing in let's say Bali, you may have been to Bali and you go, hey, I know that restaurant that's around the corner, or I know the beach club. So for them, it's very easy to visualize where their money is going.
Got it.
So for example, in Jakarta, we have a lot of people that have never been to Bali, but they may know the area where we have apartments and they go, hey, I've been to the shopping mall there. Oh, my family lives there. So for them to build that connection is much easier. But that being said, at the end of the day, people come to us for passive income. So as long as the rental yields are in line with their expectations, they will pretty much invest into whatever we offer.
And what are the rental yields usually like for Indonesia?
Pretty high, yeah. We do on average more than 10% net rental yields per year. So this is post OTA fees, tax, management fees, maintenance, insurance, everything net in more than 10%. Across the portfolio, this includes Jakarta apartments. They tend to yield 9 to 11-ish%. The Bali properties, generally about 11-ish, but could be as high as 15% net. Does not include capital appreciation.
Wow, that's definitely great returns. Yeah, that's crazy. I guess another thing about your business that is quite unique, because usually I think on this show we talk to tech founders, right? So it's like very traditional SaaS software or B2B SaaS, those kind of things. But it seems like your business, there's a real estate company almost, right? There's an operating company, but there's also a property company, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about maybe that general model and maybe some of the pros and cons in operating this kind of dual-sided marketplace or between real estate and also finance and also technology?
So we're not a pure tech play, obviously. Like I mentioned earlier, we own the real estate. So we're more of a tech-enabled platform. So we buy these high-income producing assets and we then fractionalize them. And we build the tech around streamlining that process. So we could have tens of thousands of people investing in the same property. We can distribute their rental income. That's really where the tech comes into play to enable to allow people to invest from $1. Just to give you an idea, if you were to do fractional property like you and I in this country, you would have to go to the notary and do thumbprints.
Yeah.
So obviously that doesn't scale, and that's where we work with the lawyers and with the regulators to build a framework to get us into the sandbox to do this at scale. The business basically consists of a two-sided marketplace. So we're constantly juggling supply, which is the properties, and on the other hand, the demand, which is the users.
Got it.
For now, we have about 130,000 users on the platform. So we're still focusing on the supply, on the demand side, sorry. We still want to make sure we get more users, get that north of 1 million. And then at the same time, finding the right properties at the right time. And the emphasis is there on the right time. That's generally the challenge.
Got it. So I guess you guys also have to have this very multidisciplinary team, right? To actually generate demand on both the supply and demand side, and also maybe even like property agents or these kind of other functions, right? To make this business actually work.
So because I've personally been investing in Bali for 8-9 years, I've built up a lot of experience, network as well, and a lot of data. So we have quite an interesting process to buying properties. Often when you have interest in potentially buying a property, you would go and view it first.
Yeah.
We have flipped that model upside down. So what we basically do is we do a quick check online. Often it's Airbnb if it's in Bali. We'll check the area. We'll look at the reviews. We look at the pricing. We look at the pictures. If that looks okay, we'll just go straight into data.
Wow.
Historical data. Historical data from the bookings. What about the future bookings they have? Roughly the general expenses. Then we plot that into our model, and that will spit out a rough valuation that we think is fair for that property. We then compare that against the asking price. And if that range is acceptable, we'll go back to the seller and say, okay, this is interesting. Now we will do a viewing. So we look at anywhere from about 25 to about 30 villas a week from a data standpoint. Actual viewings, 2 or 3 a week only. So this is much more efficient. Obviously the team was a bit disappointed that we flipped this the other way around. They were like, hey, we want to go out there and see nice properties.
Yeah.
They were like, why do you want us to sit in the office all day, look at numbers? But it's a lot more efficient.
Got it. I guess the data side is also where, technologies like AI and big data can actually come in. I think historically in Southeast Asia, maybe the challenge is just lack of data. But maybe what you guys are doing is, as you're viewing more and more listings, you're building this corpus of data. So there's more potential to do this kind of stuff in the future as well.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Data transparency is very challenging. If we look at the US or even Singapore, you can see exactly how much your neighbor paid for the property or how much they're renting for. Now, such thing does not exist in Indonesia. But because we look at so many properties and we look at historical data and future data, we actually layer this on top of each other. So we use our own data that we get from our management, the properties that we manage. We have second-party data of friendly management companies that share info with us.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of third-party sources like AirDNA, for example, where you can pull data that comes from Airbnb. So we then layer this on top of each other to create accurate forecasting of where we think this property will go. But I think in the future, it's something we're working on at the moment, is how can we leverage technology to automate more of this process where we just upload the historical data and it will spit out for a full forecast.
That's great. Where do you think this business will be headed in the future? What does the future look like for GoRo?
Our goal is to build the #1 investment platform for Indonesia. I don't necessarily mention property in this. I feel property will always be a part of this.
Yeah.
But I feel there's a whole array of other opportunities that we can go into. That's called bond tokenization, gold tokenization. We could tokenize art. We know Masterworks in the US that does art, of course. We can do wine. So there's a lot of other opportunities that we can go into. But obviously, as an early stage founder, we have to be laser focused on doing one thing very well. Let's build that million, or like you get the user base to millions of active, happy users. And then we can slowly implement this across different products. And obviously, just on properties alone, we're talking Bali and Jakarta. Jakarta is a very large city. Bali is reasonably big, but we're not talking about all the other large cities in Indonesia. So there's a lot of room for us to expand geographically. And then we can obviously also expand in terms of asset classes. We're currently focusing on low-end housing in Jakarta and villas in Bali. But we know there's also a very strong demand for low-end housing in Bali. So can we tap into this? What about hotels, shopping malls? Perhaps we tokenize a toll road.
Right.
A ton of opportunities that we've not even tapped into.
Yeah, it reminds me of like fundamentally like REITs are trying to do the same thing, right? And you're basically creating this index fund that is tied to one specific type of asset class or one specific property type or those kind of things, right?
At the moment, yes. We allow people to invest in a specific property or asset class.
And I guess, and maybe even another opportunity as foreign investors who are actually looking into Indonesia, right? Because I guess in countries like Japan, the yields are really low for the interest rates. So maybe they would be interested in something like this as well.
Absolutely. I feel that once we get the company to a certain size where we have figured out everything when it comes to marketing, user acquisition, property acquisition, we can start focusing more on foreign markets. We currently serve users from about 45 different countries globally.
Wow.
So they are often referrals that have come to us, but we can definitely tap into a market like Japan where interest rates are close to zero. The Japanese yen pretty much devalues against the IDR.
Right.
So I think there's a great opportunity to bring that money into Indonesia as well. And again, that's from a very reasonable amount, which also we've seen now interest from family offices. So institutional money that wishes to get exposure to an emerging market like Indonesia or Bali. When they go to the traditional financial, the property advisory firms, they often have to bring multi-million-dollar checks.
Yeah.
And often these family offices can be like, hey, I just want to do $500,000 to start with or $1 million. So that's where we also have an opportunity to tap into. So not just retail, institutional money is an opportunity.
That's amazing. I want to bring this back to maybe, we talked a lot about the business side and the market and opportunity, but maybe back to your personal story, right? And to me, it's quite interesting because, you know, you're obviously from Europe, you know, you were working in more traditional fields before. Now you're in Indonesia, emerging market. You're building a business model that has not been done, right? That's why you guys had to, you know, be in the sandbox. You're working in a culture that maybe you're relatively unfamiliar with before, but now maybe more familiar with. What advice do you have to maybe young people out there who are not only, I guess, scared about or hesitant to start their own business, but also make such a big leap, right? Leap of faith in terms of geography, in terms of working environment, culture, all of these things.
One thing I still ask myself till today when it comes to big decisions is, what's the worst that can happen? And it comes back to what I mentioned earlier about me moving from the UK, which obviously is quite close to the Netherlands, close to my family, moving halfway across the world to Singapore. And I was like, what's the worst that can happen? I try.
Yeah.
I get to experience it. If I don't like it, I'll just go back. And then what? I maybe have lost some money. I spent some time on this, but at least I've tried. So, and I still live by that standard still today. Even when we buy new properties, I think of basically I need to de-risk myself on the property investment. So I look at what's the worst that can happen. And when I start to think about this way, things become quite reasonable and acceptable. So I always say this to people, just give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? You lose a bit of money, just go for it. But at least you've tried. At least you'll never regret trying, but you may regret not doing it.
I like that framework, the regret minimization framework. I think Jeff Bezos says the same thing. I guess just to push you on that, you know, now the world has so many opportunities. So a lot of people, they think about, oh, like if I make a decision, or even for your business, right? If you go into a specific business line, there's an opportunity cost, right, associated with it. And sometimes your path is very unclear, whether it be in life, professional, or, you know, product, these kind of things. How do you evaluate those? Like, how do you know which one to pick?
For me, what's very important is that I'm passionate about what I'm trying to solve, the problem I'm trying to solve. And I'm very passionate about real estate. I'm very passionate about making it accessible to everyone. So that's the one that drives me. I know a lot of founders say, I'm not very passionate about the problem. I'm just very excited about building this business. But for me, that passion is super important. In fact, over COVID, I tried to build another business. I had secured some initial funding. I'd established a great founding team, but I just wasn't passionate about what I was doing. So I simply said, let's just not do this. But funnily enough, my Bali business that I had pre-COVID suffered massively during COVID, as you can imagine. There was a tourist in Bali. Of course, I still had to pay about 25 people salary. Luckily, we were able to continue to pay by reducing hours and pay. But what I found is that I was still putting in the same amount of effort. Despite losing money every month, I was still putting in the same amount of effort to do my books and work with my team. And I was like, hey, if I can do this without making money, imagine trying to build a proper business out of this.
Right.
So that's kind of why I pursued this. And even till today, as you'll know, building a startup is extremely challenging. But this helps me get over these challenges.
Last question, maybe for a lot of the young people that may be curious, how do you find your passion?
I think you just find it. It's just something that you just start doing it and you go, hey, I actually really enjoy doing this.
So just trying things and kind of seeing what sticks.
Yeah. And I think just like with property, like I just started doing this because it looked fun. But then during COVID, I realized I'm actually very passionate about this. I'm making no money and I'm still putting a lot of effort into this. So can you really find passion? Of course, you can experiment, right? You can try a lot of things and see what sticks. But I think it takes quite a lot of time to really realize that you really like doing something in particular.
So just to sum, basically try new things. That's number one. Number two is don't be afraid to fail, right? And number three is, try to find things that are aligned with your passion, basically.
100%.
Got it. For the last section of the interview, what we do is basically a rapid fire section. So I'll give you a few questions and then just see whatever pops into your mind, okay?
Yep.
All right. So the first question that we have is, what's your favorite tech tool or app that you like?
I am probably an Airbnb super user. I check Airbnb all the time.
Okay.
It's a great source for us to kind of cross-check what we get from sellers to make sure that makes sense. I also use it to check what new properties have come on the market.
Yeah.
So it's a great market research tool for us.
Okay. I remember during COVID, there was a group on Instagram, whatever, and they were trying to look at Zillow and, they call it property porn, basically, right? All these nice houses or something, but maybe some of them are in Bali. The second one is, if you're not doing what you are doing now, what do you think you'd be doing?
I would have been doing a scaled down version of this business, actually. So like I mentioned earlier about the worst case scenario, my worst case scenario in this case is that I run Goro on a much smaller scale with friends and family.
Because you were doing this anyway.
I was doing this anyway, yeah. So I flipped my side hustle into a full-blown startup now. But the worst case scenario would be to continue that side hustle, which was actually very profitable, and it made me more money than my day job.
Wow, that's amazing. What's the worst advice that you've ever received?
For a while, there was a trend where people would lie about their growth. And people were kind of incentivizing us, hey, if you make your numbers look a bit nicer, it maybe helps you with raising. I just can't get to it. We see a lot of issues in the Indonesian startup ecosystem today because of this. So luckily, we always stayed clear of this.
That's great. And then I guess, what's the best advice that you've ever received?
What's the worst that can happen? Just try. Go out there. If you want to build a business, if you're passionate about it, just go for it. Like, what's the worst that can happen?
Just do it.
Just do it, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate the conversation. Really appreciate your time. Before we wrap up, where can people find you, or if they want to learn more about Goro?
You can find us on Goro, so GORO.ID on the internet. You can find us on our app, obviously. Instagram, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn. So yeah, please give us a try. It's from $1, so I'm sure it's accessible to everyone.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Robert. And it was amazing chatting more about your journey.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.